Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is David Goodhart. I'm head of the demography unit at Policy Exchange, but I've wandered into the vocational training field temporarily. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this event, which is really designed to air the argument that Edward Peck has made in the publication that we released today on making the case that the much needed expansion of level 4-5 vocational training should be mainly provided by universities, particularly new universities like his own Nottingham Trent. We are going to have Edward rehearsing that case in 5 or 7 minutes. But prior to that, by the way, we will have a brief pre-recorded message from the Secretary of State on where he stands on this issue. Then, as I say, Edward will describe his thesis. We will then have a response from Alan Francis, who's the director of Oldham College. Alan will put an alternative perspective from where he sits, which is obviously in an FE college. And we've also got then two respondents, two MPs who are going to respond to those two statements. We've got Ben Bradley, who's the local MP in Mansfield, and we've got Robert Halfon, who I hope is there somewhere. I can't actually see Robert, but and then we'll have plenty of time then for comments, questions from all of you. There are now about 30 of us here, so hopefully everybody who wants to say something will be able to. We're meant to be winding up at 4:30, but I mean, some of you may have to go a bit earlier. There may be will hopefully be some of you still here at 4:30. So without hanging around any longer, shall we go into the statement from Gavin Williamson? Robert, can you hear me? I think this is happening by magic.
I'm delighted to be joining you today for the launch of this very timely report. As some of you may know, technical education reform is a drum I've been beating for some time. It's also a priority for the government as we seek to level up the whole country. We know that there is a glaring gap between the skills that people have and those that businesses actually need. If we are to emerge from the COVID pandemic, ready to tackle the economic challenges ahead of us, we have to deal with that. What is holding us back is that too few people hold a higher technical qualification as their highest qualification. In this country, the number is only 10%, compared to around 20% in Germany and 34% in Canada. The number of people taking foundation degrees has shrunk from a high of around 82,000 a decade ago to 29,000 today. That is not the way we'll recover from this pandemic. We have, however, already taken action to strengthen technical education. We've rolled out T-levels, our new technical qualifications. We've transformed apprenticeships by working directly with businesses. We've made a massive investment in our FE colleges and ring-fenced up to £290 million for our flagship Institutes of Technology. These are the foundations on which we are going to build a new higher technical education offer. It'll be a pivotal part of the Prime Minister's lifetime skills guarantee to give adults the chance to take up free courses and to apply for flexible loans to retrain at times to suit them. We've introduced a national scheme to approve higher technical qualifications that provide the skills that employers need, starting with those sectors where they most need them. First digital, to be followed by health and science and construction. But there is much more we have still to do. I'm delighted to see universities thinking seriously about how they offer more higher technical education, and I'm pleased that this report gives some practical suggestions on how they may do so. I know that many universities already offer these qualifications, but I want to see an upsurge in the number of people studying higher technical education there, not in the thousands, but in the tens of thousands, and ultimately in the hundreds of thousands. Yes, in universities, but just as importantly, in colleges. Because I must disagree with the report on one key point, and that is the role of colleges. Colleges are the beating heart of so many of our towns. They must have an absolutely central role in this agenda. If we are to get the increase in higher technical education we need, then both colleges and universities will need to play an active part in delivering it, not one and not the other, but both. I welcome the report's enthusiasm for higher technical education. I share it 100%. And I want to assure you that I will continue to work with you to see higher technical education take its rightful place in our education landscape. And thank you for contributing to this debate.
So there we are. Qualified praise, I think, perhaps from the Secretary of State, with some reservations, and FE College is the beating heart. So, Edward, why don't you respond by describing your thesis and where perhaps the Secretary of State is wrong?
Thanks, David. Hello, and thanks to all of you for making the time to be here this afternoon. I want to thank the Secretary of State for his opening remarks. I want to thank David, actually, in Policy Exchange for publishing the report. And I want to thank my two co-authors, Rich and Will, who are in the meeting. I'm sure you've looked at the report, and I'm not going to present all the issues that are in it. And I do see it as just one more contribution to a live debate. I want to say a few words about what shaped my perspective. And I suspect I'm the only person here who possesses 2 level 5 qualifications, one of which I got from what was then Bristol Polytechnic, and the second one I got through a combination of Rapid Results College and a local college in Havant many years ago. So if anyone can trump that, I'd be interested. My priority in this debate, as in everything I do at the university, is what is going to deliver best to the learners, employers, and the broader economy, and not what most suits the organisations involved, be they universities or colleges. Higher education in the UK has many significant successes and strengths, but I think I would see myself and probably be seen as one of its sternest critics from within the tent about its weaknesses. The third thing that's shaped my view is being a member of the Auger Review. That made 2 lasting impressions on me in relation to FE colleges. The first was their prolonged underfunding over the last decade, which I don't think is well understood in higher education at all, or indeed in broader society. And also the excellent work that so many are doing, particularly those with degree awarding powers. I was particularly struck by Blackpool, Weston-super-Mare, reaching out to provide education in towns where often universities are not present and won't be present and don't need to be present. And when I see universities in my remarks in the report, I'm referring to organisations that have degree awarding powers, including colleges. And my perspective is shaped also inevitably by my experience the last 6 years in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. First of all, with Vision West Notts College, and I'm pleased that its principal, Andrew Cropley, was with us this afternoon. I'm sure we'll want to comment later on his view of our relationship. But also Nottingham College and a thing called Confetti, which is an independent training provider that NTU bought about 5 years ago. I want to focus on the FEC-HEI relationship because it has caused most of the comment, including the Secretary of State. And that my view, that whilst there's been much talk of the benefits of collaboration between the two, there's not much that's going on that makes a major difference on the ground. And I think we have to do something about that. And this suggests to me we need a framework that stimulates more effective arrangements at a local level to create an integrated system from level 2 through to level 7. And I think what we're debating here is what's the best way of doing that takes us beyond warm words to real action. So I'm going to take many elements of what I say in the report as common ground. So more flexible, more accessible learner loans, leading to more adults of all ages, taking more bite-sized programs in technical and vocational qualifications at sub-degree level. I'm going to take that, I think, as a shared agenda for all of us. So I want to reiterate, again, why I believe that universities are central to the delivery of levels 4 and 5 higher technical skills, and why that central role in this system is so desirable. And I want to start by looking at the wider political imperative that government has been setting for universities, particularly universities like mine. And that's to move away from lower quality academic degrees and encourage more 18-year-olds to take more vocational certificates and diploma courses. And we're hearing that a lot from both Secretary of State and the Minister. Now, I agree with this actually as a policy aim, but it has consequences. I mean, these courses have to be attractive to those young people. And in my view, this is most likely to be delivered if these students are still, in inverted commas, going to university, with the status that still conveys in society on both them and indeed their qualifications. But the other thing is that deleting undergraduate degree programs from universities' portfolio costs universities money. They're much more to do this if they can see alternative income streams. And that's, I think, the reality of where we are with universities and their finances. Secondly, universities are teaching over 800,000 students on level 4 and level 5 courses each year already. Now, they're not all relevant to higher and technical skills agenda. They're not all described as being standalone courses, but an awful lot are higher and technical education, and more, I think, will become standalone qualifications. So where is the benefit of not optimizing the expertise, experience, and facilities universities in support of delivery of a new generation of higher technical qualifications? Why wouldn't you do that? Thirdly, and I think this is a point to which the Treasury may be more attracted than others, this approach would mobilise the considerable resources, capability and capacity of universities into a policy area where without it, government would have to invest even more significant amounts of money to realise its ambitions. I think fourthly, it offers the prospects of universities engaging with places which may be higher education cold spots well beyond the delivery of courses. And this is a message from the case study in Mansfield in the report. Now, NTU has taken over most of the level 4 and level 5 provision from Vision West Notts College, in fact, from this autumn. And that's acted as a platform for a much broader range of activity. Now, our business plan for this initiative sees NTU investing more than £5 million in the educational aspect over 5 years before we start to see a financial return. So this is a major commitment by the university of its own money to developing our presence in Mansfield. But beyond that, we're doing all the 5 things that the UPP Foundation's report said universities should do in towns such as Mansfield, which are targets for levelling up. And their report came out on Monday. And the 5 things are enabling town centre regeneration. And we are part of, at the moment, their Future High Streets Fund, as well as their Future Towns Fund, particularly around student accommodation. Increasing economic capability, and that's both in terms of skills of local people and bringing more skilled people to the town. Boosting educational attainment in schools and for adults. Delivering research and innovation in the area, and our first major project is on social prescribing in some of the poorer communities in the town. And finally, supporting the local NHS, which is crucial. So much of what we're doing is training local people to have local training in their local hospital, local placements, to see their career in their local hospital. So that's a key part of what we're doing. So all those 5 things have been covered by the work in Mansfield. Fifthly, finally, and perhaps most controversially, but I think it has to be said if we're going to be realistic about the world, without such a framework for collaboration and without universities having a central role in the picture, then the turf wars that we all want to avoid, I think, become more likely, not less likely. So as new loan availability drives demand for new level 4 and 5 flexible courses, some universities will almost certainly, and we want them to, in my view, use their financial heft to repurpose existing and invest in new human and physical capacity to attract students. Universities, I'll let you on no illusion, universities are fiercely competitive organisations, and they will invest their money to make sure that they thrive. Now, regrettably, this is another lesson from my own experience in Nottingham. We bought Confetti, the ITP I mentioned earlier, to enhance our reach into digital and creative subjects, and sought to explore Nottingham College the best way forward, given they had some overlapping provision. Now, we couldn't come to an arrangement, work for them or work for us. And so after we invested £7 million in new facilities and kit, they withdrew their courses a couple of years later. And my concern is that without a proper framework for this relationship, we're going to see that happening, I think, in a number of cities where you have both universities and indeed colleges. So we need to find such a framework that provides more stability for all concerned. And I've suggested and exemplified in the report the starting point for one. The only other one I've seen, which seems to have much traction, is the merger takeover model that we hear a lot about in both Lambeth and Bolton. And I'm sure colleagues have views about that. Now, there may be other ones, they may be better. I hope these open remarks provide some more background to my position and how it's developed. And I'm looking forward to hearing other points of view in the debate. So thank you, David.
Thanks. No, I think that's really, really helpful, useful summary. Yeah, and we'll have to find out if anybody can match you on the 2 level 5 qualifications. We can come to that later, perhaps. Anyway, it was straight over to you, Alan, for your response.
There you go. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Edward. Just to preface my comments, to say Edward has been very generous with his time. He's discussed some of these ideas with me online. I found him very open and has brought a real kind of momentum to the debate. So I'll say that right at the beginning. And I also would say that compared to many of the responses that we hear from universities in response to the Auger review, this is a much different kind of response. Too often what we get is either a kind of slightly sneering, defensive or oppositional approach, which doesn't really seek to engage with the debate at all, just asserts that the world needs to carry on pretty much as it is, and nothing much needs to change. So I welcome the fact that Edward accepts the fact that things need to be different. But at that point, Edward, that's as much niceness as I'm going to provide, because I'm going to then really present, I think, quite a counter view, which I think really raises the question of what this model would do for the wider system, not for universities, but to colleges, to learners, to employers, and to places. And I think we have a difference of opinion about its relative merits on all of those fronts. And then I want to come back at the end to your wider comments about FE-HE collaboration, Auger, and so on, because I think that's where we do need to finish with some real common ground. So I'm going to ask you all to imagine that instead of writing a report, Philip Auger was organising a vast educational trip, and he had the big FE bus take off with all the FE students on their trip, and very shortly after they started, there's a disaster because they're on the motorway and the wheel has come off. And this is to do with the lack of funding in FE over a period of time, and he's therefore got a real example of the whole problem he's trying to deal with. He's got all these students on this bus, they can't go anywhere, the wheels come off, it's not working properly. And then the new universities offer a solution, which is to send their luxury coach down to come and help them out. And the luxury coach arrives, and the solution becomes to take off the higher achieving students off the FE bus, to fill up the spare seats on the luxury coach, and not to mend the broken wheel. And the FE principals would be there going, well, what are we going to do about the broken wheel? And they'd say, well, there's not much we can do about that, but we need the other 3 as spares for us, so we'll take them 3 as well. And then they drive off and leave us there. And that, unfortunately, from the point of view of FE colleges, is where this proposal would leave us. I think there's some real merit when I read the work that you've done in Notts, and I hear about some of the work perhaps in South Bank, where universities have worked very collaboratively with colleges who have been in serious financial straits or there have been serious quality issues. But I'm not sure that those areas are typical of the sector as a whole. We've got other examples of FE colleges delivering outstanding level 4 and level 5, and outstanding undergraduate provision, blended in with an apprenticeship offer, high quality work with employers and so forth. And if we were to take this model and apply it in this way across the country, it would cause more instability than it would resolve. I also think that from the point of view of learners and employers and place, there are some criticisms that we need to take seriously. So the first issue in terms of learners, I would say, is that the reason I give the analogy is that what this does, if you look at it from the system as a whole, FE colleges have got pressure from not just in post-18 provision, but post-16 provision. For sixth forms and sixth form colleges take the highest achieving GCSE students. We have the lower achieving 16 to 18-year-olds and adult returners, and this takes the higher end of that out. So effectively, it unintentionally redefines the role of FE colleges as remedial provision within the overall system. And I think that's why the Minister is slightly concerned about the model, because actually what they want to see is FE colleges with a grander role in their localities than that. I would also take issue with a couple of other important points. I'm not completely sure whether this model is about providing a different option to the 50% that are going to university, or it's about the 50% that don't go. They both require some different approaches, I think. My worry about this model for those who do go is that it may start with a level 4, level 5 option, but would quickly evolve into a 1+1+1 3-year degree done in 3 parts. And we'd be back where we started. For the 50% that don't go, I'm not sure that this model recognises the complexity of getting those learners to achieve to the high levels that we need. So the work that a college typically does with those learners is around the learning support they have, the special needs support that we give, the work on English and maths, the work about welfare, families, safeguarding, from forced marriage through to domestic violence and so on and so forth. That's also why I think the Minister is talking about FE colleges as part of their communities. The educational challenge of that 50% that don't go to university is completely different to the one that universities are used to dealing with. And there's a group that are somewhere in the middle that I'm not quite convinced universities do as well with as a college might. And I would just say that we have got a lot of learners in FE colleges. For example, we have 8% of undergraduates in Greater Manchester are doing their degrees in FE colleges. And the reason that they like coming to FE colleges is because they like the smaller scale, they like the greater support that they get. And if you look at the NSS results for 2019, you'll find that of the Greater Manchester higher education providers, the 2 top organisations are Trafford College that comes first and my college that comes second. And in terms of the quality ratings for TEF and QAA and so forth, a number of the FE colleges are silver, as are the universities. So I think in terms of quality, it's not the case that FE is quite the basket case. Perhaps that is implied by the need for the kind of universal application of this approach. I think if we move on, I think in terms of employers, the other question that is the question that we need to really concern ourselves with collectively in technical education is, how do we engage employers in this system? We've tried different approaches in the UK. We always look to Germany as having a better approach. There's historical reasons why their approach seems to work differently. I think there's some quite big issues in terms of political economy around the differences, and we need to understand those a bit better perhaps. But what we've got at the moment is a system that from the employer's side is very complex and is hard to work with, and I'm not sure this makes it any easier. SMEs don't really engage with universities on a scale. There's clear issues about SMEs and apprenticeships. There's a whole set of issues about how to do that better. And one of the proposals in the Colleges of the Future recommendations, and something the AOC have been supporting, is that FE colleges have the scale in local communities to be able to do that, and we ought to be building that in much more robustly. And I think this kind of cuts across that a bit in terms of how we work with employers in a strategic way. In terms of place then, and I'll try and wrap it quite quickly, I've been really valued the conversations I've had with Edward about the work they've done in Notts, and it really has opened up my eyes to the ways that collaboration might work better. So I don't want this to seem entirely negative, because there's lots and lots of what Edward said that I think, well, actually, there's some real merit in that too. But I am worried about the way in which we are thinking about the economics of places like Mansfield and Oldham in the way we work through these models, because I'm not sure we're getting to the nitty-gritty of the problem. The problem, surely, is that in a post-industrial economy, we have been unable to get real private sector business growth in those areas which industry has left. Reviving industry is not really the right option, but what's going to take its place? And where we seem to get stuck is we've got lots of ways of recycling public money to try and provide an alternative option, but we're not getting to the root of the issue, which is how do we apply the research, technological and scientific know-how of universities to growing business? What we tend to do is present universities as a business as the solution to those problems. You know, universities build buildings, they attract students. The problem is that all that activity does is displace it from somewhere else. So in Oldham, we see that every day because students leave Oldham and they go to predominantly Huddersfield, Manchester Met and Salford universities. They just move a few miles down the road. It suits Manchester, it doesn't do a great deal for Oldham. And I worried when I read the Mansfield work about not the work that you were doing, but then the notion that student accommodation was coming, because that seems to me to repeat the problems in a different way. So in terms of place, I'm not sure it solves the problem, but there are, I think, some solutions that universities and colleges can bring together around looking at how we apply the research knowledge of universities to the economics of place in different ways. I think that opens up a different relationship with business and training. But finally, my final comments are to go back to the Auger review and to the system perhaps that we need to build. And one of the worries I have is that in Auger, it's very clear that part of the problem is that our market-led system hasn't worked effectively enough. And my worry is not that I think that's true, but we seem to be having two main solutions coming to that. One through devolution, which is a move to greater planning, which raises the worry and the concern that learners and employers don't get to choose what we deliver. Somebody in a economic intelligence unit somewhere decides what we're going to deliver. But this model is better than that in many ways, but it also ends up proposing a monopoly where we don't have the choice of qualifications and we don't have the choice of providers and we don't have the creative tension that comes from having that choice. It all works brilliantly if you have a vice chancellor as nice as Edward, but they're not all as nice as you, Edward, and they might change their minds and they might decide to do something different. And so, and you are an outlier, in which case that kind of rests my case really, that I'm not convinced that giving this much power to universities is the solution to the problems of the system as a whole. However, I do think that these collaborations and these conversations about how we apply our collective knowledge and skills to solve the social and economic problems of local areas is absolutely the partnership that FE and HE should be driving. And we should be driving that, perhaps through devolved structures, but not led by devolution. I think we should be taking the lead role in that. And that, I think, is my response, David. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Alan. I think that I think this is an exemplary case of constructive policy dialogue. Let us now turn to our politicians who are here. We've got Ben Bradley, who is indeed the MP for Mansfield. Ben, I wonder if you'd like to just reflect on this discussion between Edward and Alan.
Yeah, thank you, David. It sounds like Edward and Alan agree on much more than that came across there from that closing statement. I think the idea of what universities and colleges need to be doing in partnership in communities is something that seems to come across from both. It's the practical elements of how that works, maybe less so. But in response to the kind of the bus analogy and universities taking the students off and leaving the colleges there, that's certainly not what I see locally. Perhaps that is down to the nature and the character of Edward and Andrew, our college principal, who I know is on the call as well. But it certainly seems to be a really positive partnership, and I'll come on to that a little bit more. But I think the economic challenge locally around that business growth, creating employment, and the kind of skills agenda is a bit chicken and egg. We talked for a long time. You can, as a government, invest infrastructure, you can improve the roads, you can have tax incentives, whatever, but actually having the skills base and the local educational organisations there as well can certainly drive businesses to want to come and relocate to somewhere like Mansfield. We've got benefits of things like being, very cheap place to come and locate your business. So I do think the two come together inevitably. I suppose the only semi-controversial thing I would say before I wax lyrical about how brilliant it is on a local level is about the kind of government role in it. I do think the needs locally and the government priority comes together here in terms of promoting that diversity of what's available, technical education and skills, and pushing all of that forward. I think government needs to financially incentivise that and to really have a bit of a carrot and stick approach to this. I know the need and the way it might work on a local level might be different in other places. There is got to be a lot of flexibility behind that, but we've got a lot of courses right now with very poor outcomes. We've got a lot of skills shortages around the country where we haven't got the courses and we haven't got the people doing the courses. So there's an obvious shift that needs to happen. And I think the Secretary of State is going to have to get his flow charts out and start to look at how he redirects the money to we want to see these things expand. So in terms of what's happening in Mansfield, it's been really fantastic. The college has had its challenges in recent years, and I know I don't want to speak for Andrew. I know he might speak shortly, but in the past, trying to deliver apprenticeships nationally, trying to deliver HE on campus, it's just been spread too thin, frankly, and that led to all sorts of financial problems, which fortunately under his leadership it seems to now be a thing of the past, and it's going great guns. But it seems to me that Nottingham-Trent stepping in and taking over that HE element on campus presents us with a lot of opportunities. The Secretary of State mentioned health and social care, mentioned digital as key priorities. There are also key priorities for us locally and key priorities in terms of local employers. The NHS is our biggest employer. The biggest private sector employer is a company called Linny, who do digital marketing and lots of kind of facing clever stuff. So a big local priority there for us. And we're able to now have this higher level 4 and 5 qualification locally. My colleague Lee Anderson in Ashfield used to be a miner and worked down the pits, and he always says that in his day, although it might seem like a low level of aspiration these days, it was very clear to see what you were going to do and where it was going to be. You knew you were going to have a career and a job because you could see it out the window. You could see the pit heads, and you knew that was going to be there for you, and that doesn't exist anymore. I think that's very true, but I think it can through this kind of approach. When you look at those NHS health style roles, for example, the local hospital is a very big and tangible local landmark. It's something you can see for your window, and it's a huge range of levels and breadth of career for a lot of young people in those kind of services. I think sometimes we're guilty of imposing a little bit of a kind of Westminster middle class aspiration on some of these kids and families, that we expect them to want to go off to university and lawyers and do all that kind of thing. I think for a lot of them, actually staying locally and having a good solid job and career is what they want. And I don't think we should be driving them away from that aspiration. I think we can, safely say that actually going and working in our NHS on a local level is a brilliant opportunity and is exactly what a lot of people want us to be helping them to do. We have a huge challenge with adult learning as well, which can come into this sector too. So actually, I think the drive that's happening at the minute around working with local businesses, around getting those courses centred around the business need on a local level, and dealing with aspiration as it exists rather than trying to pretend it is what we think it is. I think the partnership there can actually really work for our community, not to mention the economic benefit of having that student population in the town. Town centre has a lot going for it. It's a beautiful place, but it's very run down. It suffers from the same things that a lot of town centres do around the country. But having that student population, as I say, having that student accommodation, having that footfall for local business can be a huge benefit to us economically as well, not to mention the potential to attract jobs and business to the skills that we can bring out. So I'm really supportive, certainly, of what happens with this collaboration in Mansfield. I've been pushing and promoting it as much as I can on a local level. I fully accept, what Alan says about that need for flexibility around the country, but I do think some form of universities and colleges working together, not competing with each other, but delivering slightly different things in partnership, I think has to be the future for the sector.
Thank you, Ben. That's really helpful as well. Now, a couple of things I probably should have mentioned earlier, but I think we have, I don't think, we have decided to make this kind of on the record. So I think Edward and Alan were happy with that. We're also going to record it, and I mean, we will distribute it selectively, of course, but I think it's been a very good discussion so far, and I think it'd be useful to have it recorded. We'll go on. We'll move on to Q&A in a minute. We were hoping to have Robert Halfon with us. I think he is not with us. There is no way of sugaring that pill. I don't think he's here. If he is, could he let himself be known to somebody? In his absence, I think I might. Paul Lewis, you are here. I can see you. I wonder if you might just, as it were, step into Robert's slot. And perhaps Paul, by the way, is one of the leading academics studying these level 4, 5, the famous missing middle qualifications. And I know that Paul's taken a very close interest in this debate, obviously, and has read Edward's report. And I think Paul, you might have a few words to say. Why don't you have a say now? And then we'll open it up. And by the way, I think you all know, you must now be familiar with these meetings. In order to attract attention to Robert, who's managing things behind the scenes, you have to use this raise your hand button if you want to say something. But we'll come on to that after Paul has spoken for a couple of minutes. Is that okay with you, Paul?
Yeah, super. Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Edward, for writing what is a really interesting and provocative document. There are certainly parts of this report with which I wholeheartedly agree. Really, there are, but frankly, it would be boring if I focused on those, so I'm not going to. Instead, in the spirit of constructive criticism, I want to mention 3 areas where I think the report could just be better, where I think the proposals contained in it could just be stronger. And I think what unifies all 3 of the points I want to make is that all of them, I think, highlight areas where Edward and his co-authors perhaps exaggerate a little bit the significance of universities and downplay a bit more than is warranted the role of other organizations. And I think in a way that's understandable in a report of this kind, which is perhaps exaggeration is necessary in something like this. But at any rate, I'll briefly recount those 3 points. But as I say, in the spirit of constructive engagement. So on page 14 of the report, there's an approving reference to the agility with which universities have responded to the apprenticeship levy. And Edward cites increases in education and training at level 4-5 in support of that point of view. And I think there's an element of truth to that. What's important and significant for me is what isn't said at that point in the report. And what isn't said, and I'm drawing here on excellent work by Jeff Mason at the National Institute and by Kathleen Heenahan at the Resolution Foundation, and what they've highlighted is that actually quite a lot of the increase in higher level training since the advent of the levy, much of it has been delivered by universities. There are reasons to look with a little bit of skepticism about the merits of that, and I'll just mention a couple of points. First, quite a lot of that increase is pitched not at level 4-5, it's at level 6 or level 7. It's often in subjects like business administration. We all have heard about the examples of MBAs. So it isn't the kind of level 4-5 training that's needed to fill the missing middle. Second, I think a lot of the training has been tailored to and provided for older people, people who are over 25, people who are existing employees of organizations. I'm not condemning that out of hand. What I am saying is it's led arguably to a neglect of the needs of younger people who are trying to make that transition from school to the world of work for the first time. So yes, Edward, I think universities have been agile, but they haven't always necessarily been agile in ways that best serve the public interest. And in a way, this is less a message for you, as you said earlier. Universities are competitive beasts, they respond to incentives. But what this does illustrate is that unless the incentives with which policymakers confront universities are pretty carefully calibrated, then universities may end up offering a mix of skills which really isn't what the economy needs at this time, and certainly won't fill the missing middle. So that's point one. A second point that struck me when I read the report was the absence of any serious discussion, and forgive me if I missed it, of the management of apprenticeships. And I actually think this reflects an ambiguity in the report, at least when I've read the report, and I've only read it twice. I'm never completely sure with this report whether it's talking about freestanding level 4 or 5 qualifications or those that are part of an apprenticeship. And I would have appreciated more clarity on that. And I think it's important, again, from the point of view of dealing with the problem of the missing middle, because it's not just a problem of a dearth of level 4 or 5 qualifications. It's also the problem that the young people, or the people who employers are hiring to fill level 4 or 5 roles, lack practical skills. Many of them are graduates, so they're overqualified, they have too much theoretical knowledge, but they lack practical skills. So simply offering more level 4 or 5 qualifications on their own won't be the trick. You need them to be embedded with an apprenticeship so that you have the practical skills as well. Now, there are all sorts of problems about increasing the supply of high quality apprenticeship training places. The one thing I'd mention in this context is that and Alan alluded to this earlier, if you're going to get more organizations to offer a high quality apprenticeship training places, many of them, especially SMEs, are going to need help in recruiting apprentices and in managing them. And I thought it was a real gap in the report, Edward, that you didn't talk more about that. Moreover, I'd say that I know FE colleges do this. I know private training providers do this, provide help in the management of apprentices. There's nothing in the report that convinces me that universities can do it any better than FE colleges can and that private training providers. So again, I think there's a bit of an exaggeration there about the role of universities, or a downplaying of, say, FE colleges. And then third and finally, you're absolutely right to talk about the need for better labour market intelligence. I mean, who could disagree with that? It's like motherhood and apple pie. Everyone can agree that we need people to be better informed, especially young people. And there's a panoply of problems with this, not least the guidance that is provided to young people and the league tables by reference to which colleges and schools are ranked. But there's one thing I want to highlight, and I think this is a way, again, I think your report misses a trick, Edward. Because it misses a trick in failing to talk about only one important way in which training providers of all kinds, whether they be universities or colleges, can learn about the skills that employers will need in the future. And I think the mechanism in question involves catapult centres and other centres of innovation. It's not a cure-all mechanism, therefore, it's just part of a story, but one about which I think you could and should have said more. So for those who don't know, catapult centres work with employers to promote the commercialisation of new technologies. And what that means is that they are very well placed to learn what new technologies are about to be deployed by employers. So they're well placed to identify what kinds of technician skills are going to be needed in the future, whether it be pharmaceuticals, vaccine manufacturing, whether it be carbon capture and storage, or whatever it might be. Now, some catapult centres are in this area. I worked with the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult to develop an apprenticeship in cell therapy manufacturing, and that got some nice mention in the recent R&D roadmap. Everybody's heard of the AMRC. But I think in your report, Edward, in the spirit of collaborating with other organizations, I think you could have made more of the role of universities working with catapults and other centers of innovation and with colleges so as to identify in a timely manner the kinds of skills that are going to be needed to deploy the new technologies that our ministers and business leaders are talking about us needing as we come out of COVID. So I hope that they were helpful, maybe even interesting, and not going on too long. So thank you very much.
There we go. Yeah, thank you, Paul. Now, I wonder whether it, Edward, you've had various people get hacking away at your thesis, and I wonder whether you might want to just a very brief reply now. I'll give you another opportunity, perhaps at the very end, to respond to the comments and questions that I hope are going to come. But I think, would you like to say a brief word now, or would you nod your head? Oh, you're unmuted.
Just two things, I think. The first is, I think Alan's contribution just again speaks to the mutual misunderstanding that we have between FE and higher education. And so I think as a university, we work with about 1,000 small and medium-sized enterprises. We support them in all sorts of ways, including how to access apprentices. And we do enormous amounts of work with students from fairly unpromising backgrounds to both support them and make them flourish in higher education. And part of the work in Mansfield is very much that wraparound of student support, which we've learned how to do from our work in Nottingham. So I think there's more to do about understanding what we both bring to the party, Alan, that I think often gets characterised in ways that probably aren't fully representing the contribution we both make. As someone said in the chat, I think this is about actually standalone level 4, level 5 qualifications. I don't think, as well as apprenticeships, I don't think everything's going to go into apprenticeships, Paul. And I think many people will be looking at these as standalone qualifications at level 4, level 5. I accept the point about catapult centres. I think that's a really good point. And I think we have done a lot of apprenticeships actually at level 4, level 5 in universities linked to the employer standards. I think we've got much more accepting now of employer standards as a way of designing our courses. I still, though, am wanting to hear a way in which an incentive package or a structural intervention or a way of stimulating collaboration could get us to a better point in a consistent way across, and a flexible way across various localities with different histories and contributors. At the moment, I'm still struggling to see what that might look like that's going to work, so we don't leave ourselves in a simple market situation over the next 3 to 5 years, which I don't think will be helpful to any of us. But why I fear universities, just because of their ambition and their financial heft, will start to get quite assertive.
Good. Okay. Well, let's now have a debate, have some contributions from the rest of you who are here. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky to organise, but can I see the waving hands? I don't think I can actually. But I do know that there are a couple of people who, indeed, we've already mentioned Andrew Cropley, I think has been mentioned as somebody who might want to say something. Is that true? Is Andrew there?
I am here indeed.
Are you happy to step in and say something now? And in the meantime, I'll work out how to.
Yeah. Yes, it's slightly nerve-wracking being trailed by the local MP and the local Vice Chancellor, but I'll do my best to live up to their expectations. So I may not be all that popular with colleagues in FE in relation to what I'm going to say, but I need to preface it by saying that the partnership we have in Mansfield Ashfield is very much for Mansfield Ashfield, and I'm not pushing that the model we have here is exactly the right one across the country. You know, every geography has its particular nuances. And I suppose it might be worth just setting out why we agreed to go into partnership with Edward and his university, and why I think it's absolutely the right thing. And actually already, less than 3 months after signing on the dotted line, we are delivering more through that partnership than we expected to when we signed it. So why did we do it? Well, West Notts College has a really nice HE centre, which was paid for partly by the local enterprise partnership. And one of the first things I did when I joined the college in May of 2019 was to go and talk to the LEP and be chastised. And Elizabeth Fagan, our LEP chair's in this corner now, so I remember the first time I met her was being chastised as to why we'd failed to meet the targets that the LEP had set us when they invested in that centre. And I guess the reality is that for an FE college in a place like Mansfield, creating a brand around higher education is really difficult. We are 15 miles from Nottingham, 20 miles from Derby, 18 miles from Sheffield, 25 miles from Lincoln, and that's where students go that want to study HE. And certainly since the cap came off 5 or 6 years ago, that's where they've gone. And we had a situation where our HE offer was getting smaller and smaller year on year. Each year we were having to close a course or two because the numbers were unviable. And ultimately, with the exception of engineering, it was almost certainly going to wither on the vine and die. And that is not what Mansfield needs. Mansfield needs an opportunity locally for people to drive into HE, but probably in areas that we weren't actually teaching, and nursing and health-related health topics almost certainly at the top of that list, but also engineering and digital and the like needs to be where we drive. And we as a college, as you probably know, we've been in intervention for a couple of years and have got significant debt to the government. And so our ability to invest significantly to drive the sort of provision that we really could push is absolutely constrained. And also there's all sorts of public policy decisions made a while ago, diverting capital investment in the FE sector into LEPs and therefore mostly into universities has not helped over the last 7 or 8 years. But that's the reality of where we are, and there is no point in the short term fighting that reality. But Mansfield has a challenge. Mansfield and Ashfield, I'll just say Mansfield, but I mean Mansfield and Ashfield, otherwise it will take me twice as long to say. We have a challenge around skills, but we more critically have a challenge around jobs, and Alan described quite a similar dynamic to the one we have here. Our brightest and best young people go off to Nottingham, Derby, Sheffield, Lincoln, or further afield, and they don't come back because our community doesn't have the jobs to offer them, to attract them to come back. You can't train as a solicitor in Mansfield, you can't train as an accountant. There are very few high quality jobs. Mansfield and Ashfield combined are nearly as big as Derby. But imagine living in Derby as a young person, you walk past Rolls-Royce, Bombardier, you've got Toyota just down the road, all sorts of things to aspire to keep you there. We have none of that. But NTU coming to work with us has got a real capacity to support us, not just in delivering high quality skills, but to raise the aspirations to help our communities to drive the high quality jobs that those communities need in a way that we as an FE college just simply could never do. We can be an agitator and an initiator, and we can build the partnerships, but we can't bring what NTU and universities in general can to those conversations. The last speaker talked about catapult centres. Well, we are now in quite involved conversations about bringing a catapult centre to Ashfield. That simply would not have happened if NTU were not in the room. We could have tried to get that conversation going, but it almost certainly would not have done. But we now have a university partner that does it. So bringing a university into a place like Mansfield with the opportunity for modest amounts of residential accommodation, bringing more life into our town centre is absolutely a great thing for us to do. Why does it work for us? Well, it works for us because there's something in it for us. So actually the money that the NTU pay us to use our space is greater already than the margin we were making on the HE offer we were providing. And that number will only grow over time as the partnership matures. We still own our engineering and construction HE, although I've agreed in principle with Edward that over time we will transfer that, but we will transfer that in a way that works for both of us, that aligns completely with what we're doing in lower level provisions. NTU have invested in an employer engagement officer. That person sits in the same office as our apprenticeship team. So we are engaging with employers across the whole range of level 2 to level 7 offers, and we are developing our curriculum in partnership with them. So what's the so what of all that? So the so what really is that collaboration has to be the right way. We have to find a way with the backdrop of a funding arrangement which drives us to compete. We have to find a way to collaborate so that we can develop solutions that first and foremost work for our communities, but secondly, very close secondly, means that we both get something out of it. And actually, ultimately, who delivers it, there doesn't have to be a dogma, there doesn't have to be a one way, it needs to be the right way, but one that preserves the good things that each of our organisations can do in the communities that we serve. And funding by the student is absolutely not the baseline that we would all want to work on, because it drives us all to fight over that student rather than thinking about what's the right thing to offer that student and then to teach them. So it's, I think the solution we have in Mansfield and Ashfield is a really good one for our community. Finding solutions that drive collaboration, that bring the best of both parties to bear, is the right thing to do. FE colleges fighting universities, as Edward said, will almost always lose because we just haven't got the clout. Some of the people I speak to in Mansfield now, you would think we never delivered HE in Mansfield until September. They're all talking about, isn't it great now that we have HE? Well, we had just as much HE last year. It just wasn't as well branded. So we can't get into that fight. We've got to work together. And if we can throw away those shackles of self-protectionism, be confident about doing the right thing, we can create brilliant opportunities for our communities together.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. So we have got a number of people who want to make comments. Christopher Hale, Andy Westwood, Gregory Walker, David Hughes, and Bobby Vedral I have on my list. Just before I open up to those speakers, Alan, by the way, you should have a chance to come back as well. So if you two, Alan and Edward, sort of prepare to make some final comments at the very end, that'd be great. I just want to make one very quick observation myself. I mean, part of Edward's argument was related to the sort of status and glamour of the university sector, the assumption that students would be far more attracted to the university experience, which in this country invariably means a residential university experience. You know, having fun away from home for 3 years, partly at taxpayers' expense, is another way of describing it. And it did occur to me that, I mean, I think there is something in that. I mean, it is a very attractive thing to young people. But why can't we have residential FE colleges, or at least partly residential FE colleges, or with a residential aspect? And perhaps we do already. And indeed, I mean, the other aspect of the higher status of the universities is the fact they have degree awarding powers. Well, you know, why can't more FE colleges have degree awarding powers? I mean, there's a sort of simple solution to that in a way. But anyway, that's enough from me. Is Christopher Hale there?
Yeah, hi there.
Hi.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Edward. I really enjoyed the report. I thought it was really interesting, and a really interesting model, and potentially a big opportunity, as I think Ben and a few others have highlighted. And I probably agree with a lot of have been said. And whilst I sense there's a little bit of a sort of tension in this sort of HEFE space, if I understood it, he's proposing that this would be a pilot. And I think the challenge for level 4, 5 and the missing middle is such that there is, I think there's room for these sort of models and these sort of innovations alongside FE and indeed HEFE partnerships in terms of addressing some of those challenges. And I wouldn't necessarily see it as something that is sort of potentially an exclusive model in its own. And I think alongside that, I quite like the suggestion that you made for remodeling the restructuring regime in higher education, which could allow other universities to pick up some of these innovations and indeed extend them in terms of their partnerships with FE as well. But I had those are just a couple of brief comments, but I had two questions really. One was around demand, and I think decisions made at level 3 and indeed earlier, I think will be important. And I wonder if you had any sort of reflections about that and how this sort of model can help with that, particularly in relation to its relationship with schools and sort of information and guidance and advice for potential students. And the other is an issue of capacity. And I think a number of institutions have told us, particularly in relation to level 5, that there are quite a number of challenges in terms of sort of attracting and retaining high quality teaching staff who have those sort of strong sector occupational competencies. And I just wonder about your sort of reflections on that as an institutional leader and the sort of ability to attract the staff that you need to be able to deliver this kind of model.
Good. Thanks, Christopher. So, Andy, how about a quick word from you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David, and thanks, Edward, for the report, and Alan for your comments. Two or three very quick points. I think the missing middle stuff, absolutely right. We're right to focus on it, but as the Secretary of State said, it's a tiny it's a tiny layer at the moment, and it's going to take a lot of filling. We're going to have multiple ideas and types of provision put into this to get anywhere close to the countries that deliver much more of that type of provision. So, that in itself says, try different things and mix it up and pilot things. And, so Edward's right to suggest a pilot on that front. I think there are some really big issues for DFE here. One is that you're only going to stand a chance of filling this and making progress if you level up all the funding and all the institutional incentives, which just simply isn't the case either for individuals or for institutions at the moment. So you just absolutely have to fix that. It's going to be hard to do that in a 1-year spending review, but nonetheless, without doing that, it's going to be very difficult. And I think you also, as Alan sort of suggested, you have to do something about the real mismatches in governance. You've got a higher education system pointed in one direction, and you've got an FE system pointed in a different direction. And if you really want to treat this as a single system, which we should, then you have to unify that and kind of make that coherent. It is incoherent at the moment. And if you add apprenticeships, that's a third layer of incoherence that doesn't join up. So 2 big jobs for DFE if they're thinking about writing a white paper anytime soon. But the final point I really wanted to make, which is kind of, this is level 4 and 5 it's got to achieve stuff. It's got to lead to, and this is where kind of places like Mansfield and employers and kind of growth comes in. It's got to lead to higher productivity, higher wages, more activity in the private sector. It can't just be another cross your fingers and hope that another supply of a different type of human capital will have a kind of, a set of results that after all were the sets of results that we hoped would happen after expanding higher education. You've got to dock it into stuff. And I think this brings me to kind of Paul's comments. And a couple of people, starting with Paul, mentioned catapult centres. I mean, the other missing middle that we often associate with the kind of demise of the polytechnic, if you like, as an idea, is the missing middle of applied research. And kind of, it's already been kind of touched on, but this is something that universities can bring to places. And it needs filling just as much as the level 4 and 5. And going back to DFE, that link across to what BEIS and UKRI are funding in that kind of applied research space is incredibly important. If you don't link across to that and integrate with that, level 4 and 5, institutes of technology, catapult centres are just part of that agenda. But you're going to struggle to get the kinds of employer response and the kind of wage and productivity uplifts that places like Sutton and Ashfield, Mansfield, and many other places besides really kind of need. So I think put those 2 missing middles together, sort out the funding, sort out the governance, and we might have a chance.
Great, thanks, Andy. Diana Beach is now added to my list, which I think I'm going to close in a minute or 2. So if anybody is bursting to say something, if they could press the right button quite soon because we're already close to 4:10, and I want to give a bit of time to Edward and Alan at the end, or Alan and perhaps Edward having the final word. But we're next on to Gregory Walker. Gregory,
Thanks, David. From Million Plus, the Association of Modern Universities. So just very briefly, I think we've discussed the supply side a lot today of level 4 and 5 provision very valuably, and that's an important part of the agenda. And also the government have got the IoTs, obviously investing significantly in those new entities, and also the kite marking process that we haven't mentioned today that's coming in from next year, all intended to make sure you've got high quality supply and high quality provision. But I think we're missing the demand side very critically in the conversation at the moment. The big drop off in level 4 and 5 study that's taken place since about 2008 has been related to the tripling of fees for level 4 and 5 qualifications that came in 2012. Most of those qualifications at that time were being studied part-time. So you saw a collapse in part-time study, which really radically affected the uptake of level 4 and 5 qualifications. So I'd say we all have our differences about whether it should be colleges or universities who should be taking the lead in this space, and I doubt we all agree on that, but I think we could all agree to ask the government to think about a couple of really demand side improvements, restore maintenance grants for students studying standalone level 4 and 5 qualifications. We could all agree on that. That would really help. And also potentially think about some sort of level of teaching grant, some residual level of teaching grant to deflate the fees of level 4 and 5 standalone qualifications, and obviously apply that across the board to whatever provider is doing this provision in that space. Again, that would really get students back interested in this level of study. We all agree this is critical and crucial. We can work with the government to try and take positive measures forward, I think.
Good. Thank you, Gregory. Over to you, David. I should have, it's a bit late now. I should have asked people to say who they are. I think probably everyone knows who you are, David, but...
Well, that's nice for you to think so. David Hughes from Association of Colleges, just in case. Look, there's a lot to say. I put in the chat a link to an article I wrote yesterday when I had a quick chance to look at it, Edward. I thought the report's, there's a lot of good stuff in it. I like the structure. I think there's a lot in there about student funding and finance, which needs to be sorted. You know, the government seems to be on track to do something about that. There's definitely stuff about, you know, alignment with the labour market I support. It really is in that gnarly kind of supply issue that I think there was some real Aunt Sallies that you set up without any evidence that I just thought were really unfortunate, actually. You know, so the irony, I think the biggest irony for me was the this idea that we're saying, you know, colleges need more level 4 and 5 to help them financially be viable. And nobody's ever said that, Edward. That's a ridiculous argument. And yet in the same set of propositions, you say universities in financial difficulties should be propped up with level 4 or 5 growth. So the irony in that was just wonderful, I thought. Look, the big issue for me is, who is it we think is going to do level 4 or 5? Because I think we get really confused about this. I don't think there's going to be a whole flood of young people who have been going into level 6 degrees for that wonderful boarding school experience that's suddenly going to do a standalone level 4. The people we really need to get to are the adults already in the workforce and those coming into the workforce who haven't got a level 3. And they need the college support to become learners, to understand how to study, to get the confidence to build that self-esteem, which is exactly why I think the college role in this is absolutely essential. Now, I really like the NTU West Notts model. I think it's a great model. You know, let's do it, let's build it, let's develop it. But it won't work in Grimsby or Blackpool or Weston-super-Mare. It won't work in loads of places around the country. So we need different models for different places. But let's not be under any illusion. The demand side of this is about getting employers to understand that their future success depends on getting their people and the adults that they might employ better skilled to be able to have better productivity. Because at the moment, we're missing that element of this in a big, big, big way. So there's a growth of a market. And then final thing I'll say, there's loads of more I could say. The other thing, Edward, I hated in your report was this idea that universities are just absolutely naturally inclined to deliver all of this because they'll do it. There's no evidence that across the piece, that there's evidence of individual universities doing really good flexible stuff in line with employers. But across the piece, universities aren't very good at that. Lots of universities don't do that. Lots of universities don't do flexible part-time. And just final, foundation degrees, nearly 20 years ago, were a fantastic idea to do kind of apprenticeship at higher level for people already in work. They started out really well. They got bastardized completely by universities saying, oh, do you know what? We could make a foundation degree out of our first 2 years of our undergraduate degree, and then we'll just top it up to a degree. And my real fear, Edward, is that if we give all of this to universities, we'll end up with loads of 1+1+1 degrees rather than standalone 1s and 2-year level 4s and 5. And we'd miss all of the people who won't go anywhere near a university because they're frightened of it and they need the support of the college. Apart from that, it was great.
A bit of edge added there. So we've got just 3 more, which actually I think the timing is kind of working out quite nicely. If anyone, I think we might have room for somebody else if anyone else is bursting to say something, but we've now got Bobby Federal, Diana Beach and Leslie Giles. So over to you, Bobby. Bobby is from Germany originally.
Thank you very much.
From Chile, sorry. Chile.
Thank you very much, David, for organizing this. I think, it's excellent to see at least a discussion going on, which, to be honest, I think happens very, very little. And thanks for Edward for the paper and for Alan for his comments. Edward said, that he wanted to hear some, how the incentive structure could work. And I think far too many people in Britain always just speak about the incentive part and not about the structure part. The reason Germany works so well is because we have a very clear structure. The state sets the qualification. The region is the Land, is in charge of the universities, and the community, the Gemeinde, is in charge of the technical education. So the community, basically the technical education is done in very close collaboration with business, which hence also avoids poaching. Because obviously, if you organize it at community level, then if somebody's a poacher, the community pressure is massive. So that's why in Germany, don't even know so hence, as a company, you have no problem in creating specialists at the technical level because they won't be poached. And so the problem in Britain obviously is that structurally it's a mess, right? I mean, there are 3 nations, and then there is majorities, and then there are councils, and nobody has any idea who's who. And I just wonder if the education sector should literally do the whole nation a favor and create a virtual structure. I mean, there's very clear 9 regions in England, which would complement the existing 3 nations perfectly, pretty much same size in people, and literally create that there's a regional, in the region, it's where universities and colleges organize each other. And you create a perfect competition system between the regions, which is, by the way, why Germany worked so well with the pandemic, is because the Länder learned from each other because everybody had obviously their own healthcare procedures, and they just learned that some were doing very well while others were doing bad, and then they copied each other. So I do think that I agree that you need to try different things, but if you do it in a completely chaotic way, i.e. every town its own thing, it will just end in chaos. As I say, I think Britain anyways needs a proper regional organization system, as we can see with the pandemic, and maybe the education sector can take the lead by, just doing it. Thank you.
That was good. Thank you, Bobby. I think we have 4 nations, don't we? Not 3. Perhaps we've lost one already. Diana, over to you.
Thanks, David. So I'm Diana Beach. I'm the Chief Executive of London Higher. That's a body representing over 40 universities and higher education colleges in London. Now, actually, it's quite funny because what I have to say is actually very similar to what Bobby's just said. So I'm putting it down to my own sort of German background, if you like. But what I wanted to say is I'm wondering if we're actually looking in the wrong place for the incentives we say that we need for this. I mean, of course, there's a tendency in the sector to look to the national. Why wouldn't we? The Treasury's got the purse strings. But perhaps in this instance, we're better looking to the regional, as Bob has just said. I've only been in my London Hire role for just under a month, but I've already heard so much about the London Skills Strategy coming directly from the London Mayor's office. And for those that don't know, this is a strategy which encourages work on skills at the local borough and community level. And I know of some very promising pilots that have been emerging from this, and not just the LSBU in Lambeth one that I know has popped up a few times already. But there's also an alliance in West London at the moment, which sees employers, colleges and universities, including Middlesex and Brunel, who are coming together and basically working to develop a sub-regional skills commissioning function, if you like. And the idea is that this will basically act as a single portal, which local people can go to get information on the courses they need for the local jobs in their communities. So I think a collaborative approach like this at the regional level, digging deep down, does have the real potential to help the vulnerable local areas. And I'm wondering if it's time that we use the post-pandemic era, when it eventually comes, as a hook, so we can pull a few of the ongoing policy strands together as a kind of levelling up skills development agenda, if you like, which is targeted to local needs. Just one that I'm throwing out there.
Great, thanks, Diana. And we've got Leslie, and actually we have a final comment from Tina Stowell, and then I think we've closed the list now, and then Alan can briefly respond to whatever he wants to respond to, and Edward can do the same. But first, let's hear from Leslie Giles.
Okay, thank you very much, David, and thank you to Edward for putting the paper together and stimulating a discussion on a really important topic, and for Alan's response to the issues as well. I mean, my perspective on this is that I think there's a lot of agreement about the importance of enhancing our technical education offering, and particularly at the higher level. I think what's rather dispiriting and disappointing about all of this is just that, while we're revisiting the case for action now, it's not the first time we've done it. And we've made the case for action and the case for action and the case for action. And, how can we really make a difference this time? And I partly talk about that because I seem to have spent a lot of my career, and some of it in the civil service, for 20 years working with the industry infrastructure, with which, I really particularly wanted to underline the demand side, in terms of, if you're going to, a really key part of technical education, if you're going to get that right, is you've got to have industry engaged. And that's a really core element. But, I worked for a number of years in that kind of infrastructure, including latterly in the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, where we used to invest in the good old days in sector skills councils as our kind of infrastructure to engage with business. And what is the infrastructure now, I ask? And that's sort of part of the challenge. So, I mean, I think that, we've got to accept the realities of where we are. We've got to accept, underlining what Andy was just saying, this is an important agenda. It's not easy to resolve. What can we learn from what we've done before? And what can we learn from the existing good practice? And I think what the contributions from Edward and Alan actually illustrate is that there are some really great pockets of good practice that we can learn from, but we don't universally have that because of some of these problems about continually changing and not continually investing in that kind of infrastructure to make things, our system strong, and to ensure that, technical education and delivery can achieve the reputation and standards that it needs to achieve to then stimulate demand for people to want to engage with it, both individuals and industry. So I think that part of, for me, part of the answer is that both Edward and Alan are right, because we've got to look inwardly at our internal infrastructure and see where the legacy is and where the strengths are, and see where some of the strengths in terms of capacity and capability locally can be protected, amplified, invested in and supported to moving forward really effectively meet some of those labour market needs. So I think there is, the answer is that there is a place for colleges and higher education to work together, and it is about collaboration. And therefore, I personally, I've been, as part of some of my work on the Independent Commission, I would encourage people to read the vision that we've just published, which actually also underlines some of the things that people have already said around the importance of looking at the governance frameworks for key players too, such as colleges and universities locally, and also local authorities, who are key anchor institutions along with industry and employers locally in the private sector. How can we kind of look at governance, look at funding to really incentivise those strong collaborations for the future? That's really a key part of it from my kind of perspective.
Great, thank you. A plea for consensus. We're neither blue states nor red states. Tina, you can have the final word, and then Alan and Edward can wrap it up.
Thanks, David. My name is Tina Stoll. I'm a backbench member of the House of Lords, and I should say education is not my policy area at all. My interest is very much in line with the sorts of things which David has written about. I'm interested in the difference of the the sort of educational attainment gap that we see in the political context. I should also add that I'm somebody who, I don't know whether I did level 4 or 5, because I don't know whether it quite existed back then, but I had a technical education. I went to a FE. In fact, I went to Broxton College. I'm another person from Nottinghamshire, I should say. It's very good to hear so many people from Nottingham on a discussion and a debate like this. It doesn't happen very often. But I went there, and I think one of the things which is interesting to me, which has not really been discussed in this debate, and it may be just because you are all practitioners and this is all your area of policy, but as somebody who was very motivated as a teenager to go to work, I wanted a job. That was my ambition. I won't go into sort of the kind of work I wanted to do, but I just think that that is the sort of motivating factor for people wanting to learn to do rather than learn to know, is something which doesn't seem to have been touched on in this discussion, and the difference that the different incentives that people have that might lead them to this kind of type of education versus a university higher education, I think is it shouldn't be forgotten. And forgive me if it's something which is on your minds all the time, but you're just not discussing it because you're discussing the structural elements of this. But I just thought it was a point worth making. And the other thing that I was just going to say is that one of the things which I spend a lot of time thinking about in the context of the educational attainment gap is helping, or how we get to a point where those who do go through the university system and are well credentialed, how we can make sure that there is much more mutual respect between those who have that level of education versus those who go through a technical route but are nonetheless just as hardworking and ambitious for their own sort of form of success. Now, if a way of achieving that is greater collaboration between universities and FE colleges, then I'm all up for that. But that, for me, would be the reason to do it. And I'm sure that there are, you've discussed the other sort of structural reasons why there might be benefit to that. But that, for me, would be a goal worth achieving. And I'd like to think that that would be something that might feature into your sort of considerations in the future. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks for bringing the bigger picture, the head, hand, heart picture, indeed. Alan, why don't you go first? I mean, just 2 or 3 minutes, if you don't mind, both of you, and then we'll wrap up just a little bit past 4:30. So yeah, over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much. Well, I suppose the first thing I say is look what happens when you suddenly start to get people in the room to actually debate these things properly. I think probably there's nobody, I think, that will leave this discussion not thinking differently about the topic. So I think that's a very positive thing. My conclusion is, and I particularly valued the contribution that Andrew properly brought from the FE perspective in Notts to the kind of the way the model that Ed was described is working there. And I think that's great. If that sounds like a really great solution for that particular area, my problem, I suppose, is that I don't think there is a universal solution of the same model to apply everywhere. I think everywhere is different. Our institutional histories are different. The places are different. And policy has been messy in this country. So what I do think is important is this notion that FE-HE collaborations and this kind of conversation needs to be had in a structured way across the country to find solutions that meet those local needs. Now, there's some rules then I think that need to be kind of put around that. I do think that part of the issue is we shouldn't be starting with the conversation about who's going to deliver which bit of the training and education bit. I do think there's a bit about focusing on what those economic and social issues are in local areas, and particularly the applied research aspect of that. And I also think that we need solutions that recognise the need to give the power to learners and employers rather than to sit with us as such. And I think there's some really kind of quite big challenges in that. My final point is, I'm not convinced either that we're going to get solutions to all of these problems that are win-win for everybody. I think there are some painful decisions to be made too. And that means perhaps thinking about fewer institutions on both sides, thinking differently about what we deliver, because it's quite clear that we can't carry on with the systems we've got. And there isn't going to be the money to invest in all of us at all of the time, particularly given the crisis that we've had. So I think we have to be very realistic in having those local debates and those local partnerships about improving our impact and recognising that that's going to take some give and take on both sides and some different approaches in different areas.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. And so final word to you, Edward.
Yeah, thank you. So I agree very much with Alan's final point. This is about universities reinventing themselves as well, at least some universities reinventing themselves in a dialogue with their local colleges and not leaving it to a market position. I'll come back to that. What we're trying to do, Chris, around the demand, I think there will be demand. I think what's going to happen in Mansfield is that as we align the curricula, as we get confidence in the offer from moving from the college to university, from school to the college to university, we're going to get a lot more local people coming through into local HE delivered in the local town. That's what David's talked about before. And actually, our experience so far, we've stupid across clearly the Andrew staff to NTU. In our own ITP, we find it not particularly difficult to recruit people actually who've got creative digital skills to provide the service in that particular sector. I think Andy and Diane and Bobby are onto something about what is the governance structure here. And I thought it was interesting that Andrew mentioned the LEP and how he was called into Elizabeth's office to be asked about why he wasn't meeting the targets that had been set by the LEP for the university centre. That was a really useful aside because it meant somebody was holding the ring on this in terms of public money being invested to achieve an outcome that was proving difficult to do. What is the system going to do about it? Now, Andrew and I came together to sort it outside of any further LEP intervention, but I knew about the LEP targets. I knew there was a challenge. Andrew knew there was a challenge. There was a better way of doing this. And I think that was a really mature, sensible conversation. But somebody was holding the ring, Diane, I think that was an important part of it. It was, in this case, the LEP. It could have been the devolved authority who did that. The thing that Bobby just prompted me to say was that actually, this is not just about a relationship to ourselves and Vision West Notts. We also have a very close relationship with the University of Nottingham. And we are moving towards slowly a much more federated, collective description of what we're doing about education in the city of Nottingham and across the county. The bit we haven't yet got brought into that is Nottingham College for reasons I won't go into now. But I do think we're moving much more federated, Dan, as we move forward, and Bobby, at a local level. And I think the LEP, devolved authorities they come, have a role to play in really making sure that happens. I think Gregory's point about the demand side, I have great hopes for for lifelong learning loan accounts. I think they will stimulate demand. The recent UK polling that was done on would you take up more modular based education if you had more easy access to small amounts of loans, of fees and grants, was very positive, and Chris was involved in that work. The master's loans that have come in have generated real demand across actually all of society to pick up people's development of their level 7 skills. I think that's a really optimistic part of it. I'm not sure they are Aunt Sally's, David. You'd be unsurprised for me to come back on that. I have heard the argument made actually by serious people that the reason we need to make sure that FEC's level 4 and 5 is because they will help their financial position. That's right, because actually if it's left to a market, there'll be a real problem, I think, for FE colleges. That's my concern, because universities are very good at markets and are very responsive and have financial heft to pursue the opportunities. So I think what we need is a managed market. And I'd be interested in David's view at some point on how we get an incentive system and a governance system that actually makes sure colleges can have a framework within which that debate about their contribution is structured and sensible and mature. And as somebody said a little later, Leslie, deals with the legacy. So what is the geography? What are the providers? What is the history? What do we need? A structured discussion. If it's left to the market, I really worry about how FE colleges will come out of this, David. So I think the challenge for the Association of Colleges is, what would that discussion look like? What could that framework look like? Because without that, I think by default, what's in my report might come to pass in ways that are not helpful actually to universities or helpful to colleges once demand really starts to come up through the lifelong learning loan accounts. And my view, Tina, about snobbery is one way of removing snobbery if all these people learn in the same place under a university banner. So I think that, that's not a popular view, but I think it might work. So I think there's been a really healthy debate. I really welcome it. I've learned a lot again about the position we're in. The report would have been a better report, a much better report, had I had this roundtable before we published it. That was the original plan, but it kind of got away from us, I'm afraid, in terms because of COVID-19 and other things going on. But I really appreciate the discussion, and I hope we can keep it going over the next few months as we move towards something that needs to make sure we have a stable and structured approach to how this policy field unfolds. So I'm sorry, Tim, if you didn't say snobbery, I do apologise. I heard the word snobbery, but if you didn't use it, I apologise.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. We've actually gone on for much longer than I expected, and hardly anybody seems to have dropped out. So I think it's been a very high level of discussion. I've understood most of it, not all the acronyms. We've, as I said earlier, we have recorded it. So if anybody wants the recording, then I think we can probably send it to you. So yeah, it just remains to say thank you, particularly to Edward for writing the paper and presenting it here, and to Alan for responding, and for all of you for contributing or just listening. Thank you very much. I think that's it.